At my wedding reception, just as the champagne bubbles were still dancing in crystal glasses and the last echo of heartfelt toasts hung in the air, my sister Maya stood up from table 3 in her emerald green bridesmaid dress, microphone somehow already in her trembling hand, and announced to our 150 guests that I had been having an affair with my ex-boyfriend Jake for the past 6 months. The ballroom at the Grand Meridian Hotel fell into that particular kind of silence that only comes when a bomb has been dropped in a room full of people who thought they were safe. My name is Sophia Chen, and from wherever you're watching this, please stay with me. Because what happened next will show you exactly what happens when someone tries to destroy your happiest moment, but you've been 3 steps ahead of them the entire time. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The thing about betrayal is that it never announces itself with fanfare. It doesn't knock politely on your door or send you a formal invitation. It shows up wearing the face of someone you love, someone you trust, someone who has shared your secrets in your childhood bedroom and 26 years of Christmas mornings. Maya had always been the dramatic one in our family, the one who needed the spotlight like flowers need rain, but this wasn't just drama. This was calculated destruction, and as I watched her swaying slightly in those silver heels she'd insisted on buying to match her dress, I realized that everything I'd discovered 3 weeks ago was about to pay off in ways she never could have imagined. The microphone crackled with feedback as she cleared her throat, and I could see our mother's face across the room turning pale, our father's jaw dropping, my new husband Daniel frozen with his champagne glass halfway to his lips. Maya's voice cut through the silence like a blade through silk, each word delivered with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment. "I'm sorry to ruin this beautiful celebration," she began, though her tone suggested she was anything but sorry. "But I can't sit here and watch my sister marry Daniel when she's been lying to everyone in this room." The gasps started then, a collective intake of breath from aunts and cousins and college friends who had flown in from 3 different states to celebrate what they thought was the happiest day of my life. But here's what Maya didn't know, what she couldn't have known, as she stood there in her emerald dress with her perfectly curled hair and her rehearsed speech about family loyalty and painful truths. 3 weeks ago, I found her journal. Not her diary, not some teenage notebook filled with crushes and complaints, but a detailed, methodical journal where she had been documenting her plan to destroy my wedding for months. Page after page of her handwriting, plotting and scheming and researching how to cause maximum damage at exactly the right moment. She had researched the psychology of public humiliation, studied articles about scandal timing, even practiced her speech in the mirror until she had it memorized. And most damning of all, she had documented her entire fake affair story, complete with fabricated evidence and manufactured timeline, all designed to make me look like the kind of woman who would cheat on her fiancé while planning their wedding. The journal had been sitting on her kitchen counter when I stopped by to pick up the wedding favors she had volunteered to assemble. Maya was in the shower, steam curling under the bathroom door, and there it was, open to a page that made my blood freeze in my veins. Phase 3, Public Revelation, it read in her careful handwriting. Wait until after toasts but before cake cutting. Maximum audience, maximum impact. Make sure to mention specific dates and locations to add credibility. Sophia won't be able to defend herself without looking desperate. I had stood there in her kitchen, holding that journal with shaking hands, reading page after page of her meticulous planning, and that's when I knew that this wasn't sibling rivalry or wedding jealousy. This was warfare. So I photographed every single page, every detail of her plan, every fake timeline, every manufactured piece of evidence she intended to use against me. And then I did something Maya never would have expected from her sweet, naive little sister. I set a trap of my own. I created a group text with our 3 closest cousins, our mother, and 2 of my bridesmaids. People who knew both of us well enough to recognize Maya's patterns but who loved us both enough to want to handle this as a family. I sent them the photos of her journal with a simple message. This is what Maya is planning to do at my wedding. I need your help to stop her without destroying our family completely. The responses came flooding in within minutes. Shock, disbelief, anger, and then, from our cousin Rebecca, who had dealt with Maya's manipulations for years, a simple message that changed everything. I've been saving screenshots of weird texts from her for months. I think you need to see them." That's when the real evidence started pouring in. Rebecca had saved months of text messages from Maya, messages where she detailed her jealousy, her resentment, her desperate need to be the center of attention at my wedding. Screenshots of her asking Rebecca to help her find dirt on me, begging her to remember any embarrassing stories from our childhood that could be used against me. Messages where Maya had tried to convince Rebecca that I didn't deserve Daniel, that I was stealing the happiness that should have been hers. And then, the most damning evidence of all, a series of texts between Maya and her friend Jessica, where Maya had explicitly outlined her plan to create a fake affair story, complete with discussion of how to make it sound believable, and how to time the revelation for maximum impact. But Maya's masterpiece, the evidence that would ultimately be her downfall, came from her own phone. In her arrogance, in her certainty that she was smarter than everyone else in the room, she had been texting her friend Marcus throughout the entire wedding reception, live updates on her plan, play-by-play commentary on how well her performance was going, even a message sent just moments before she stood up that read, "About to drop the bomb. This is going to destroy her. She'll never recover from this. Finally, everyone will see that Sophia isn't so perfect after all." These texts, with timestamps showing they were sent during my wedding reception, would prove beyond any doubt that this was premeditated cruelty, not a moment of painful honesty or sisterly concern. As Maya continued her speech, her voice growing stronger and more confident as she detailed her fabricated affair story, I remained perfectly calm. Daniel's hand found mine under the table, squeezing gently, because he was one of the few people who knew what was coming. I had told him everything the night before, shown him the journal photos, the text screenshots, the evidence that would vindicate us both. He had been hurt, of course, devastated that someone he considered family could harbor such malice, but he had also been proud. Proud that I had handled the situation with such strategy and grace, proud that I had chosen to protect our wedding rather than simply cancel it or ban Maya from attending. "Let her hang herself with her own rope," he had whispered as we lay in bed the night before our wedding. "You've already won, she just doesn't know it yet." The beautiful thing about truth is that it doesn't need to shout to be heard. It doesn't need dramatic gestures or theatrical timing. It simply needs to be revealed at exactly the right moment, and that moment was now. As Maya finished her speech with a flourish, tears streaming down her face in what appeared to be genuine anguish, but which I now knew was nothing more than practiced performance, I stood up slowly from the head table. My dress, a flowing creation of ivory silk and delicate lace that had taken months to design, caught the light from the chandeliers as I moved, and the room's attention shifted from Maya to me, like a spotlight finding its true target. I walked calmly to the small stage where our DJ had set up his equipment, my heels clicking softly against the polished marble floor, and I could hear the whispers starting to ripple through the crowd like waves against a shore. But I wasn't nervous. I wasn't angry. I was, for perhaps the first time in my entire relationship with my sister, completely and utterly in control. I reached for the microphone stand, adjusted it slightly, and looked out at the sea of faces staring back at me. Family members, friends, colleagues, all of them waiting to see how I would respond to what appeared to be the most devastating accusation a bride could face on her wedding day. Maya had always been the kind of person who could make you doubt your own memories. Growing up in our house on Maple Street in Portland, she possessed this uncanny ability to rewrite history as it happened, to twist conversations and situations until you found yourself apologizing for things you never did and defending positions you never took. She was 3 years older than me, which in childhood terms meant she held all the power, all the knowledge, all the social currency that comes with being the first to reach each milestone. While I was still playing with dolls, she was experimenting with makeup. While I was reading chapter books, she was dating high school boys. While I was trying to figure out who I wanted to be, she had already decided who I was allowed to become. Our parents, Margaret and Robert Chen, had always treated Maya like she was made of spun glass and starlight. She was their firstborn, their miracle baby, who had arrived after years of fertility struggles, and from the moment she drew her first breath, she could do no wrong in their eyes. When Maya threw tantrums, it was because she was passionate, When she lied about breaking something, it was because she was creative. When she manipulated other children into giving her their toys, it was because she was a natural leader. I learned early that challenging Maya's version of events was futile, not because she was always right, but because everyone around us had been trained to believe that she was. The pattern established itself when I was 7 and she was 10. Maya had deliberately broken my favorite music box, the one our grandmother had given me for my birthday, because she was angry that I had received what she considered to be the better gift. When our parents found the pieces scattered across my bedroom floor, Maya immediately began crying and explaining how she had seen me throw it against the wall in frustration because I couldn't get the tiny ballerina to spin properly. Her performance was so convincing, complete with trembling lip and genuine tears, that our parents didn't even question her story. I was punished for breaking my own gift and for lying about it, while Maya was comforted for being such a caring sister who was only trying to help me tell the truth. This became her signature move throughout our childhood and adolescence. Maya would create a problem, blame me for it, and then position herself as the caring family member who was reluctantly bringing the truth to light. She stole money from our mother's purse and hid it in my backpack, then expressed concern about my possible shoplifting problem when our parents found it. She spread rumors about me at school and then comforted me when I came home crying, offering to help me figure out why people were saying such terrible things. She sabotaged my science fair project the night before the competition and then stayed up late helping me create a replacement, earning praise from our parents for being such a supportive big sister. By the time we reached high school, Maya had perfected the art of public humiliation disguised as concern. She would wait until we were at family gatherings or school events, surrounded by people whose opinions mattered, and then she would drop her carefully crafted bombshells. "I'm worried about Sophia," she would say to our aunt at Thanksgiving dinner, her voice dripping with false concern. "She's been so secretive lately, and I found some concerning things in her room." The concerning things were always manufactured or taken completely out of context, but Maya's reputation as the responsible older sister meant that adults took her seriously, while dismissing my protests as typical teenage defensiveness. The worst incident happened during my senior year of high school, at the academic awards ceremony where I was supposed to receive recognition for being valedictorian. Maya, who was home from her sophomore year of college, had somehow convinced our parents that I was struggling with an eating disorder. She presented them with evidence she had gathered, photos of me looking thin in certain outfits, screenshots of me declining food at family dinners, even a fake diary entry she claimed to have found where I supposedly detailed my obsession with losing weight. The intervention happened 2 hours before the ceremony in our living room, with Maya crying as she explained how she had been documenting her concerns because she loved me too much to watch me hurt myself. I missed the academic awards ceremony that night because I was sitting in a hospital emergency room, being evaluated by doctors who found absolutely nothing wrong with me. But Maya had achieved her goal. The spotlight that should have been mine that evening was redirected onto her, as she played the role of the concerned sister who had potentially saved my life. Our parents praised her intuition and her courage, while I was left trying to explain to my teachers and classmates why I had missed the biggest academic achievement of my high school career. Maya apologized later, of course, claiming she had only been worried and that she was so relieved I was okay. But I saw the satisfaction in her eyes, the quiet triumph of someone who had successfully redirected attention away from my success and onto her own heroic narrative. College provided a blessed 4-year respite from Maya's manipulations, but even from a distance, she found ways to insert herself into my achievements. When I made Dean's List, she would call our parents to express concern that I was studying too hard and neglecting my social life. When I got accepted into the Honor Society, she worried aloud about whether I was becoming too competitive and losing sight of what really mattered. When I started dating Daniel during my junior year, Maya immediately began researching his background, calling me with concerns about his family's financial situation, his career prospects, his intentions toward me. Daniel Martinez was everything Maya couldn't stand, genuinely kind, successful in his own right, and completely immune to her manipulations. He was a software engineer with a quiet confidence that didn't need external validation, and he saw through Maya's performances from the very first time they met. During that initial introduction at a family barbecue, Maya had launched into her usual routine, positioning herself as my protective older sister while subtly undermining my confidence with backhanded compliments and embarrassing childhood stories. But Daniel simply smiled and changed the subject, refusing to engage with her drama or validate her need for attention. From that moment, Maya declared war on my relationship, though she disguised her attacks as sisterly concern. She would call me after Daniel and I had fights, somehow always knowing exactly when we had argued, offering to listen while simultaneously planting seeds of doubt about his commitment to me. She befriended his ex-girlfriend on social media and would casually mention things she had learned about their relationship, always framed as concern about patterns she was noticing. She even went so far as to create fake dating profiles to test his loyalty, though when I discovered this and confronted her, she claimed she was only trying to protect me from getting hurt. When Daniel proposed to me on a sunset beach in California, Maya's reaction was telling. While our parents cried happy tears and our friends celebrated, Maya's congratulations felt hollow, forced. She immediately began inserting herself into the wedding planning process, volunteering for tasks and offering opinions that seemed helpful on the surface, but always carried an undercurrent of criticism. She questioned every decision I made, from the venue to the dress to the guest list, always couching her criticism in the language of concern and sisterly advice. The engagement period became a constant battle of wills, with Maya positioning herself as the expert on weddings, relationships, and what was best for me. She researched statistics about divorce rates and would share them during family dinners, always with the disclaimer that she just wanted me to be realistic about marriage. She befriended our wedding planner and would text her suggestions and concerns about my choices, creating confusion and tension in what should have been a joyful planning process. She even suggested that maybe Daniel and I should have a longer engagement, just to be sure we were making the right decision. But the most insidious part of Maya's campaign was how she gradually isolated me from other family members by positioning herself as the voice of reason and concern. She would have private conversations with our parents, our aunts and uncles, our cousins, expressing her worries about my mental state, my decision-making abilities, and my relationship with Daniel. By the time anyone brought these concerns to me directly, Maya had already shaped the narrative, making me appear defensive and unreasonable for not acknowledging the valid points she was raising. The wedding planning process should have been one of the happiest times in my life, but Maya turned it into a psychological minefield where every decision became a potential source of conflict, and every joyful moment was tainted by her constant interference. It started subtly, as her manipulations always did, with small suggestions and helpful observations that seemed innocent enough on the surface, but carried deeper implications designed to undermine my confidence and create doubt about my choices. When Daniel and I announced our engagement date for September 15th, Maya immediately expressed concern about the timing. "Are you sure you want a fall wedding?" she asked during a family dinner, her brow furrowed in what appeared to be genuine worry. "I've read that September weddings have higher stress levels because of back-to-school energy, and the weather can be so unpredictable. Plus, aren't you worried about competing with all the other fall?" She followed this with a detailed analysis of how the dress made me look older, more serious, less like the free-spirited person she knew me to be. She wondered aloud whether Daniel would be disappointed that I wasn't choosing something more unique, something that reflected the adventurous woman he had fallen in love with. By the time I left the bridal salon that day, I was convinced that my dream dress was actually a boring, conventional choice that revealed my lack of imagination and style. I scheduled 3 more appointments to look at other options, each time bringing Maya along for her opinion, each time leaving me more confused and less confident than before. The guest list became another source of Maya's manufactured concern. She questioned every person Daniel and I wanted to invite, finding reasons why each choice was potentially problematic. His college friends were too rowdy and might create problems at such an elegant venue. My coworkers were too competitive and might spend the evening networking instead of celebrating. His family members were too traditional and might not appreciate the modern elements we were incorporating into the ceremony. Her criticisms were always couched in language of protection and care, but the cumulative effect was to make me doubt my judgment about the people who mattered most to us. Maya also began inserting herself into every aspect of the planning process, volunteering for responsibilities, and then using those roles to create additional opportunities for control and manipulation. She offered to coordinate with the florist, then spent weeks texting me photos of arrangements that were completely different from what Daniel and I had chosen, explaining that she was just exploring options because she wanted to make sure we had considered all possibilities. She volunteered to handle the wedding favors, then ordered samples of items that contradicted our chosen theme, claiming she was thinking outside the box and helping us avoid choices that might seem too predictable. The most insidious part of Maya's campaign was how she began to position herself as the expert on Daniel's preferences and expectations. Despite barely knowing him and having no meaningful relationship with him, she would make authoritative statements about what he wanted, what he expected, and what would make him happy on our wedding day. "I really think Daniel would prefer a more intimate reception," she would say during planning meetings, despite Daniel having explicitly expressed his excitement about celebrating with a large group of friends and family. "He strikes me as someone who values substance over style, so maybe we should focus less on decorative elements and more on meaningful touches." These pronouncements always came with the implicit suggestion that I didn't know my own fiancé well enough to understand his true desires, that Maya's outsider perspective gave her clearer insight into what would make our marriage successful. When I would contradict her assumptions with actual conversations I had had with Daniel, Maya would nod sympathetically and say something like, "Of course he tells you he wants a big party, but I think he might be saying that because he knows it's what you want. Men often sacrifice their preferences to make their partners happy." The breaking point came during a family dinner 6 weeks before the wedding, when Maya suggested that Daniel and I might want to consider couples counseling before getting married. "I've been reading about how beneficial premarital counseling can be," she said, her voice filled with the kind of earnest concern that made disagreement seem selfish and short-sighted. "Especially for couples who are as different as you two are. I mean, you're so social and outgoing, and Daniel is more reserved and analytical. Those differences can be wonderful, but they can also create challenges that might be better addressed before you make a lifetime commitment." The suggestion was presented as caring advice from a loving sister, but everyone at the table understood the implication, that Maya had identified fundamental incompatibilities between Daniel and me that were serious enough to require professional intervention. Our parents exchanged worried glances, and I could see the doubt creeping into their expressions as they considered whether Maya might be right to be concerned about our relationship's foundation. That night, Daniel and I had our first serious fight about Maya's involvement in our wedding planning. He had reached his breaking point with her constant interference and manipulation, and he wanted me to set clear boundaries about her role in our celebration. "She's sabotaging our wedding," he said bluntly, his usual diplomatic demeanor replaced by frustrated anger. "Every conversation with her leaves you doubting yourself, doubting us, doubting decisions we were excited about. This isn't a normal sisterly concern, Sophia. This is psychological warfare, and she's winning because you keep giving her ammunition." I defended Maya, as I always did, explaining that she was just trying to help, that she wanted our wedding to be perfect, that her concerns came from a place of love. But even as I spoke the words, I could hear how hollow they sounded, how practiced my defense of her behavior had become. Daniel listened patiently, then asked me a question that changed everything. "If Maya's advice is so helpful, why do you feel worse about our wedding every time you talk to her?" The discovery happened on a Tuesday afternoon in late August, 3 weeks before our wedding, when I stopped by Maya's apartment to pick up the wedding favors she had volunteered to assemble. She lived in a converted loft downtown, all exposed brick and industrial fixtures, the kind of space that looked effortlessly cool but had actually been meticulously designed to project a specific image of artistic sophistication. Maya had always been particular about her living space, treating it like a stage set where she could perform the role of the successful, creative older sister who had her life perfectly together. I used the spare key she had given me months earlier, calling out as I entered to let her know I was there. The sound of running water from the bathroom told me she was in the shower, and I could hear her singing off-key to some pop song I didn't recognize. The wedding favors were supposed to be arranged on her dining table, small silver boxes filled with lavender sachets that matched our wedding colors, but when I walked into the main living area, I found the table empty, except for a scattered collection of her personal belongings. Maya had always been someone who lived in organized chaos, with piles of papers and books and random objects covering every surface in what appeared to be disorder, but which actually followed her own internal logic. She could locate any item instantly within her seemingly cluttered space, and she became agitated when anyone tried to tidy or organize her belongings. That day, her dining table was covered with the usual assortment of items: magazines, unopened mail, coffee cups, charging cables, and her laptop surrounded by various notebooks and loose papers. But it was one particular notebook that caught my attention, lying open near the edge of the table where Maya had apparently been working before her shower. The page facing up was covered in her distinctive handwriting, and my name appeared multiple times in what looked like some kind of list or outline. Curiosity got the better of me, and I stepped closer to read what she had written, thinking perhaps it was notes for a maid of honor speech or ideas for wedding day surprises. What I found instead made my blood freeze in my veins and my hands started trembling as I realized the scope of what I was looking at. The page was titled Operation Perfect Wedding Destruction and contained a detailed, methodical plan for sabotaging my wedding day in the most psychologically devastating way possible. It wasn't a moment of spontaneous jealousy or sibling rivalry. It was a calculated campaign of psychological warfare that Maya had been planning and refining for months. The first section of her plan was labeled Phase 1 Preparation and Evidence Gathering, and it contained a timeline starting from the week after our engagement announcement. Maya had documented her systematic approach to creating a believable narrative about my supposed infidelity, including research into my daily routines, my work schedule, and my social media activity. She had identified the perfect candidate for my alleged affair partner, Jake Morrison, my ex-boyfriend from college, who I hadn't seen or spoken to in over 3 years. Maya had chosen Jake specifically because our relationship had been serious enough that people would believe we might reconnect, but distant enough that he wouldn't be likely to contradict her story immediately. She had researched his current location, his job, his relationship status, even his social media activity patterns. Her notes included observations about times when Jake had liked or commented on my old photos, innocent interactions that she planned to recontextualize as evidence of ongoing communication between us. The level of detail in her planning was both impressive and terrifying. Maya had created a fictional timeline of my supposed affair, complete with specific dates, locations, and scenarios that she had crafted to be plausible but impossible for me to disprove in the moment. She had identified times when I had been out of town for work conferences or visiting friends, and she had fabricated stories about secret meetings with Jake during those periods. She had even researched the hotels where my company typically booked accommodations, so she could reference specific locations that would sound authentic to anyone familiar with my travel schedule. But the most chilling part of Phase 1 was Maya's documentation of how she had been testing her story with various family members and friends, gauging their reactions and refining her narrative based on their responses. She had casual conversations with our cousins, our parents, even some of my college friends, dropping subtle hints about her concerns about my relationship with Daniel, and mentioning Jake's name in contexts that seemed innocent but were actually laying groundwork for her eventual revelation. Phase 2 was labeled Credibility Building and Witness Preparation, and it revealed how Maya had been systematically manipulating people's perceptions of me and my relationship for months. She had been documenting my behavior, photographing me at moments when I looked tired or stressed, recording conversations where I expressed normal pre-wedding anxiety, and collecting this evidence to support her narrative that I was someone capable of deception and betrayal. Maya had also been cultivating relationships with Daniel's friends and family members, positioning herself as a concerned sister who was worried about red flags she was noticing in my behavior. She had reached out to his mother, expressing her love for me while subtly sharing her concerns about my recent secretiveness and mood changes. She had befriended his best man, Mark, and had been gradually introducing the idea that I might not be as committed to the marriage as I appeared to be. The most disturbing element of Phase 2 was Maya's plan to create false evidence of communication between Jake and me. She had researched techniques for spoofing text messages and email addresses, and she had been practicing creating fake screenshots that would appear to show intimate conversations between us. Her notes included detailed instructions for timing these revelations to maximize their impact and minimize my ability to respond effectively. Phase 3 was the culmination of her plan: public revelation and maximum impact. Maya had chosen the wedding reception specifically because it would provide the largest possible audience of people who cared about both Daniel and me. She had timed her revelation for the moment after the toasts but before the cake cutting, when everyone would be relaxed and happy, making the shock of her announcement even more devastating. Her notes included detailed observations about the psychology of public humiliation and how to maximize the emotional impact of her revelation. She had researched studies about crowd behavior and group dynamics, learning how to present her story in a way that would make it difficult for people to dismiss her claims immediately. She had even practiced her speech, timing it to be long enough to be convincing, but short enough to prevent interruption. Maya had also planned for various possible responses from Daniel and me, with contingency strategies for each scenario. If I denied the affair, she was prepared to present her fabricated evidence and question why I was being defensive instead of addressing her concerns directly. If Daniel defended me, she was ready to position herself as the loving sister who was trying to save him from making a terrible mistake. If either of us tried to leave or shut down the conversation, she had planned to use that as evidence of guilt and deception. But perhaps the most revealing aspect of Phase 3 was Maya's documentation of her expected emotional reactions and how she planned to perform grief and regret while actually feeling satisfaction and triumph. She had written detailed notes about how to appear reluctant and pained while delivering her devastating revelation, how to position herself as someone who was sacrificing her own comfort for the greater good of protecting Daniel and preserving family integrity. The final section of her plan was labeled Aftermath Management and Long-Term Strategy, and it revealed that Maya had been thinking far beyond the wedding day itself. She had considered how to maintain her narrative in the face of potential contradictory evidence, how to position herself as the family member who had been brave enough to speak the truth, and how to leverage the situation to permanently damage my relationship with Daniel while enhancing her own reputation as someone who prioritized honesty and family loyalty above personal comfort. Maya had even researched divorce statistics and had prepared herself to be Daniel's primary source of support when our marriage inevitably failed as a result of her revelation. She had plans to be the shoulder he cried on, the family member who had tried to warn him, the person who would help him heal from the betrayal I had supposedly inflicted upon him. In her mind, destroying my wedding was just the first step in a longer campaign to reclaim what she saw as her rightful position as the most important woman in our family's emotional landscape. As I stood in Maya's apartment, reading page after page of her meticulous planning, I felt something shift inside me that I had never experienced before. It wasn't anger, though anger was certainly present. It wasn't hurt, though the betrayal cut deeper than anything I had ever felt. It was a cold, clear understanding that Maya wasn't just jealous or competitive or temporarily unhinged by wedding stress. She was dangerous, and she had been systematically working to destroy the most important relationship in my life for her own psychological satisfaction. The shower was still running, Maya's voice still echoing off the bathroom tiles as she sang her cheerful song, completely unaware that her carefully guarded secret had just been discovered. I realized that I had perhaps 10 minutes before she finished her shower and came looking for me, 10 minutes to decide how to handle the most devastating betrayal I had ever experienced. And in that moment, I knew that everything Maya had taught me about manipulation and strategic thinking was about to be turned against her in ways she never could have anticipated. Standing in Maya's apartment with her journal of destruction in my hands, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable just minutes earlier. Instead of confronting her immediately, instead of calling Daniel or our parents in a panic, instead of allowing my emotions to drive my response, I chose to think strategically. Maya had spent months planning my humiliation with methodical precision, and I realized that defeating someone who operated at that level required more than righteous anger or hurt feelings. It required a plan of my own. The water was still running in the bathroom, and I could hear Maya starting what sounded like a second verse of her song, which meant I had precious little time to act. I pulled out my phone and began photographing every page of her journal, my hands surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. Each page revealed new layers of her calculated cruelty, and I documented every detail, every timeline, every piece of fabricated evidence she had prepared to use against me. As I photographed her handwriting, I noticed something that would later prove crucial to my own strategy. Maya had been so confident in her plan, so certain of her own cleverness, that she had included detailed critiques of my personality and character throughout her notes. She had written extensively about what she saw as my weaknesses, my blind spots, my tendency to trust people, and give them the benefit of the doubt even when they didn't deserve it. In her mind, these qualities made me an easy target, someone who would be too shocked and hurt to mount an effective defense against her attack. But Maya had made a fundamental miscalculation about who I really was beneath the surface. Yes, I was trusting and optimistic and generally believed the best about people. But I was also my father's daughter, raised by a man who had built a successful law practice by understanding that preparation and evidence always trumped emotion and desperation. I was also my mother's daughter, inheriting her ability to remain calm under pressure and think clearly in crisis situations. Maya had been so focused on my apparent vulnerabilities that she had completely overlooked my strengths. After photographing the journal, I carefully returned it to exactly the position where I had found it, making sure that everything on Maya's dining table appeared undisturbed. Then I quickly searched for the wedding favors, finding them in boxes stacked in her bedroom closet, clearly prepared but deliberately kept from me as part of some smaller manipulation I hadn't even been aware of. I loaded them into my car and drove home, my mind racing with possibilities and plans. The first step in my counter strategy was to verify Maya's claims about Jake Morrison, to understand exactly how much truth, if any, existed within her fabricated narrative. I reached out to Jake through LinkedIn, crafting a casual message that referenced our college connection and mentioned that I was getting married soon. His response came within hours and provided exactly the information I needed. He was happily married, living in Seattle, and had no memory of any recent contact with me beyond occasionally liking my social media posts. More importantly, Jake was shocked to learn that someone might be claiming we had been in communication, and he immediately offered to provide whatever documentation might be needed to refute such claims. He sent me screenshots of our complete message history on every platform, showing that our last meaningful conversation had been over 3 years ago when he congratulated me on a job promotion. He also offered to write a statement, if needed, confirming that we had had no romantic or inappropriate contact since our breakup in college. Armed with this information, I began building my own evidence file, but I knew that simply disproving Maya's lies wouldn't be sufficient. She was skilled at manipulating situations to her advantage, and she would find ways to explain away contradictory evidence or pivot to different accusations. I needed something that would expose not just the falseness of her specific claims, but the calculated malice behind her entire campaign against my relationship. That's when I remembered something Maya had said during a recent family dinner, a casual comment about how she had been staying in touch with some of Daniel's friends and family members because she wanted to make sure she could be supportive during our engagement period. At the time, I had thought it was sweet that she was making an effort to build relationships with my future in-laws. Now I realized it was reconnaissance, part of her strategy to position herself as a trusted insider who could more effectively deliver her devastating revelation. I reached out to Daniel's mother, Patricia, with a carefully crafted phone call that seemed like a routine check-in about wedding preparations. During our conversation, I casually mentioned that Maya had been so helpful throughout the planning process, and I wondered if Patricia had any suggestions for how I could thank her for all her support. Patricia's response was revealing. She mentioned several conversations she had had with Maya, conversations where Maya had expressed subtle concerns about my readiness for marriage and my commitment to Daniel. Patricia repeated some of Maya's comments, framing them as the kind of caring observations that showed what a thoughtful sister I had. But hearing them repeated back to me, I could see the careful manipulation in every word Maya had chosen. She had planted seeds of doubt without making direct accusations, created an atmosphere of concern without taking responsibility for specific claims. It was masterful psychological manipulation, disguised as loving family involvement. I had similar conversations with Daniel's best man, Mark, and 2 of his college friends who Maya had somehow befriended over the past few months. In each case, the pattern was identical. Maya had reached out to them under the guise of wanting to support Daniel during our engagement, but had used those relationships to introduce subtle doubts about my character and commitment. She had been careful never to make explicit accusations, but she had created a network of people who were primed to believe her when she finally decided to reveal her fabricated affair story. The genius of Maya's approach was that she had made these conversations feel natural and caring, so that Daniel's friends and family members had no idea they were being manipulated. They genuinely believed that Maya was a loving sister who was trying to ensure Daniel's happiness, and they were grateful for her apparent concern and involvement. This made it even more crucial that my response be strategic rather than emotional, because simply accusing Maya of manipulation would make me appear paranoid and unstable. As I gathered this information, I began to formulate a plan that would turn Maya's own tactics against her. Instead of waiting for her wedding day ambush and then trying to defend myself against her accusations, I would create a situation where she would expose herself through her own actions and words. The key was to give her enough rope to hang herself while ensuring that the truth would be undeniably clear to everyone present. I started by creating a group text message with 6 people. Our 3 closest cousins who had known Maya and me since childhood, our mother, and 2 of my bridesmaids who had witnessed Maya's manipulative behavior over the years. These were people who loved both of us, but who had the emotional intelligence to recognize patterns of manipulation when they were clearly presented. I sent them a simple message. I need to talk to all of you about something serious regarding Maya and the wedding. Can we meet this weekend? The meeting took place at my apartment on Saturday afternoon, and I presented my evidence methodically and calmly. I showed them the photographs of Maya's journal, explained the timeline of her planning, and provided context for the various manipulations she had been executing over the past few months. I also shared the conversations I had had with Daniel's family and friends, demonstrating how Maya had been systematically undermining my relationship while positioning herself as a concerned family member. The reaction from my family members was exactly what I had hoped for, and exactly what I had feared. They were shocked, hurt, and angry, but they were also protective of family unity and worried about the potential consequences of exposing Maya's behavior publicly. Our cousin Rebecca, who had always been the most perceptive about Maya's patterns, was the first to speak after I finished my presentation. "This explains so much," she said quietly. "I've been getting weird texts from Maya for months, and I saved them because they felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on why." She pulled out her phone and began scrolling through her message history with Maya. "Look at this," she said, showing us a text from 6 weeks earlier. "I'm worried about Sophia. She seems different lately, more secretive. Have you noticed anything? I don't want to say anything to Mom and Dad yet, but I think something might be going on with her and Daniel." Rebecca had more screenshots, dozens of them, showing Maya's systematic campaign to plant seeds of doubt about my relationship and my character. Maya had reached out to multiple family members with similar messages, always framing her concerns as loving worry, always asking them to keep an eye on me and report back if they noticed anything unusual. She had been building a network of unwitting allies who would be more likely to believe her when she finally revealed her fabricated affair story. But the most damning evidence came from my bridesmaid Sarah, who revealed that Maya had approached her just 2 weeks earlier with a request that made perfect sense in light of what we now knew. Maya had asked Sarah to help her plan a surprise for me at the wedding reception, something that would happen after the toasts but before the cake cutting. She had been vague about the details, saying only that it would be emotional and meaningful, and that Sarah's job would be to make sure everyone was paying attention when Maya stood up to speak. Sarah had agreed to help because she thought Maya was planning something sweet, perhaps a special speech or a slideshow of childhood memories. Now she realized that Maya had been recruiting her to be an unwitting accomplice in my public humiliation, ensuring that the maximum number of people would be focused on Maya when she delivered her devastating announcement. As we sat in my living room, processing the full scope of Maya's betrayal, I outlined my plan for the wedding reception. I wouldn't try to prevent Maya from executing her attack, because stopping her would only delay the inevitable and give her time to refine her approach. Instead, I would let her proceed exactly as she had planned, but I would be ready with evidence that would expose her lies immediately and definitively. The group agreed to help, understanding that this wasn't about revenge or cruelty, but about protecting not just my marriage but also our family from Maya's ongoing manipulations. We spent the rest of the afternoon coordinating our roles and ensuring that everyone understood exactly what would happen and when. The wedding reception at the Grand Meridian Hotel was everything Daniel and I had dreamed it would be in those early months of planning, before Maya's shadow had fallen across every detail and decision. The crystal chandeliers cast warm light across the marble floors, the floral arrangements bloomed in perfect harmony with our chosen color palette, and our guests moved through the elegant space with the kind of relaxed joy that comes when people genuinely love the couple they're celebrating. For the first time in months, I felt truly present in my own wedding celebration, not because Maya's threat had disappeared, but because I was finally in control of how her story would end. Daniel looked impossibly handsome in his charcoal gray tuxedo, his smile genuine and unforced, as he moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and sharing laughs with friends who had traveled from across the country to be with us. He knew what was coming, of course. I had told him everything the night before, shown him Maya's journal entries, explained the elaborate plan she had constructed to destroy our marriage before it had even legally begun. His initial reaction had been anger, then hurt, then something approaching impressed disbelief at the scope of her manipulation. "I always knew she didn't like me," he had said as we sat on our hotel room bed, surrounded by evidence of Maya's calculated cruelty. "But this isn't about not liking me. This is about needing to destroy anything that makes you happy." He had held my hands as we talked through our strategy for the reception, and I had seen something in his eyes that I had never seen before. A protective fierceness that came from truly understanding the depth of what we were facing together. Now, as the reception unfolded exactly as we had planned, I watched Maya working the room with her usual charismatic efficiency. She looked stunning in her emerald bridesmaid dress, her hair perfectly styled, her smile radiant as she posed for photos and chatted with relatives she rarely saw except at family gatherings. To anyone observing her, she appeared to be the picture of the supportive older sister, glowing with pride and happiness for my special day. But I had learned to read the subtle signs of Maya's true emotional state, and I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her smile became slightly fixed when she thought no one was looking, the nervous energy that made her fidget with her jewelry when she paused between conversations. She was preparing for her moment, building up the courage and adrenaline she would need to execute the performance of her lifetime. Our cousin Rebecca had positioned herself at a table with a clear view of the entire ballroom, her phone discreetly ready to record whatever unfolded. Sarah, my bridesmaid, whom Maya had tried to recruit as an unwitting accomplice, sat with Daniel's college friends, prepared to witness and later testify to everything she observed. My mother had been briefed on what to expect, though she still harbored hope that Maya might change her mind at the last moment and abandon her destructive plan. The toasts began right on schedule, with Daniel's best man Mark delivering a heartfelt speech about friendship and finding the right person to share life's adventures. Daniel's father spoke about welcoming me into their family, his words warm and genuine, in a way that made Maya's manipulative conversations with him seem even more calculated and cruel. My own father's toast was emotional and beautiful, expressing his pride in the woman I had become and his confidence in the marriage Daniel and I were beginning. Throughout the speeches, I watched Maya's face carefully, noting how her expression shifted slightly each time someone praised my character or expressed confidence in our relationship. She applauded at the appropriate moments and smiled brilliantly for the photographer, but I could see the underlying tension building as her moment approached. When the formal toasts concluded and the DJ announced that dinner would be served shortly, I saw Maya take a deep breath and straighten her shoulders. She reached for her champagne glass and stood up from her assigned seat at table 3, the movement smooth and confident, practiced from weeks of rehearsal in her apartment mirror. The conversations around her began to quiet as people noticed her standing, expecting perhaps an additional toast from the maid of honor. But I was ready. Hidden beneath the head table, Daniel and I had set up a small tablet connected to the hotel's audiovisual system, loaded with every piece of evidence we had gathered about Maya's plan. Sarah had coordinated with the DJ to ensure that we could take control of the sound system and projection screens at exactly the right moment. Rebecca had her phone ready to capture Maya's reaction when she realized that her carefully constructed narrative was about to crumble around her. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Maya cleared her throat and tapped her champagne flute with a butter knife, the crystal ringing out across the ballroom like a bell summoning everyone's attention. The remaining conversations died away as 150 guests turned to focus on her, expecting perhaps a sentimental speech about growing up with me or wishes for our future happiness. Maya smiled brilliantly and lifted her microphone, somehow having acquired it from the DJ's station with the kind of confident authority that made her actions seem natural and planned. "Thank you all for your attention," she began, her voice warm and slightly emotional, exactly the tone she had practiced to convey reluctant honesty rather than malicious intent. "I know this isn't traditional, and I apologize for interrupting such a beautiful celebration, but there's something I need to share with all of you, something I've been struggling with for months." The room was completely silent now, guests leaning forward slightly in their chairs, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. Maya's performance was flawless, her body language conveying the reluctance of someone being forced by conscience to reveal a painful truth. She looked directly at me as she continued, her eyes glistening with what appeared to be genuine tears. "Sophia, you're my sister, and I love you more than anything in this world," she said, her voice catching slightly on the words. "But I can't stand here and watch you begin a marriage built on lies. I can't let Daniel commit his life to someone who has been deceiving him for months." The gasps from the audience were audible now, sharp intakes of breath as people began to understand that this wasn't going to be a traditional maid of honor speech. Maya paused dramatically, allowing the tension to build exactly as she had planned. "For the past 6 months, my sister has been having an affair with her ex-boyfriend Jake Morrison. I have proof of their meetings, their communications, their betrayal of Daniel's trust. I've tried to convince myself that it was just pre-wedding anxiety, that she would end it before today, but I found evidence just this morning that they met again last night, even after all the vows and promises she made to Daniel." The reaction was immediate and devastating. Guests turned to stare at me with expressions ranging from shock to disgust to sympathy for Daniel. I could see my mother's face crumpling with pain and embarrassment, my father's jaw tightening with anger. Daniel's parents looked stricken, his friends confused and upset. The photographer continued shooting, capturing every moment of what appeared to be the most dramatic wedding disaster anyone in that room had ever witnessed. But Maya had made one crucial error in her performance. She had become so focused on delivering her practice speech with maximum emotional impact that she had forgotten to monitor my reaction. Instead of the shock and devastation she expected to see on my face, instead of desperate denials or tearful pleas for understanding, she found me sitting calmly at the head table, my expression composed and my hands steady as I reached for the tablet hidden beneath our table. "That's a very interesting story, Maya," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom without need for amplification. "But before our guests form any opinions about your accusations, I think they should see this." I touched the screen of our tablet, and suddenly the hotel's projection screens came to life, displaying the first page of Maya's journal in her own unmistakable handwriting. The title, "Operation Perfect Wedding Destruction," appeared in bold letters across multiple screens positioned throughout the ballroom, and I watched Maya's face transform from confident triumph to absolute horror as she realized what was happening. The room erupted in confused murmurs as guests tried to process what they were seeing. But I continued calmly, advancing through the photographs of Maya's journal pages. "This is my sister's detailed plan for destroying my wedding," I explained, my voice remaining steady and clear. "She's been working on it for months, documenting every step of her strategy to create a false affair story and deliver it at the most psychologically devastating moment possible." I clicked through pages showing Maya's research into Jake Morrison, her fabricated timeline of our supposed meetings, her psychological analysis of how to maximize the impact of her revelation. Maya dropped her champagne glass, the crystal shattering against the marble floor with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the stunned silence of the ballroom. She lunged toward me, reaching desperately for the tablet, but Daniel intercepted her smoothly, his hand gentle but firm on her arm as he guided her back to her position. "There's more," I continued, clicking to display screenshots of Maya's text messages to our family members, her systematic campaign to plant seeds of doubt about my character and my relationship. "Maya has been manipulating all of you for months, positioning herself as a concerned sister while actually working to sabotage the most important day of my life. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable, displayed in Maya's own words and handwriting for everyone to see. But the most damning revelation was still to come. And I saved it for last. The piece of evidence that would remove any possibility of Maya claiming her actions had been motivated by genuine concern for Daniel's well-being. And finally, I said, clicking to the last screenshot, here's what Maya texted to her friend Jessica this morning, just hours before making her dramatic announcement. The message appeared on screens throughout the ballroom. About to destroy perfect little Sophia's wedding. She'll never recover from this. Finally, everyone will see she's not as perfect as they think. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of Maya's sobbing, as she realized that her carefully constructed plan had not only failed, but had exposed her true nature to everyone she had ever hoped to impress or manipulate. The transformation in the ballroom was like watching a tide turn in slow motion, the collective understanding washing over our guests as they processed what they had just witnessed. Maya stood frozen in the center of the room, her emerald dress now seeming garish under the crystal chandeliers, her perfectly styled hair framing a face that had gone completely white with shock. The champagne glass she had dropped lay in glittering fragments around her feet, and she stared at the projection screens as if she could will the evidence of her betrayal to disappear through sheer force of denial. Our great-aunt Helen, who had always been Maya's biggest supporter and had consistently praised her for being such a protective older sister, was the first to find her voice. "Maya, is this real?" she asked, her words cutting through the silence like a blade. "Did you really plan all of this?" The question hung in the air, and I could see Maya's mouth opening and closing as she struggled to find words that could possibly explain away the damning evidence displayed in her own handwriting. But explanation was impossible when faced with such comprehensive documentation of premeditated cruelty. Maya's journal entries weren't the product of a moment of jealousy or a temporary lapse in judgment. They represented months of careful planning, psychological research, and strategic manipulation. The screenshots of her text messages showed a pattern of calculated deception that extended far beyond our immediate family, revealing how she had systematically worked to undermine my relationship with Daniel, while positioning herself as a caring family member. I was trying to protect everyone," Maya finally stammered, her voice barely audible as she looked around the room at faces that had shifted from shock to understanding to something approaching disgust. "Sophia has always been secretive, and I was worried about that." But even as she attempted to construct some kind of defense, her words sounded hollow. And desperate against the weight of evidence that proved her motivations had nothing to do with protection or concern. Daniel's mother, Patricia, stood up from her table, her face a mixture of hurt and anger, as she addressed Maya directly. "You came to me 3 weeks ago," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "You sat in my kitchen and told me you were worried about Sophia's commitment to Daniel. You made me doubt whether she was ready for marriage. You made me question whether my son was making the right choice." Patricia's words carried the weight of betrayal that extended beyond just Daniel and me, encompassing everyone Maya had manipulated in service of her destructive plan. My father, who had always treated Maya like a second daughter, and had consistently defended her against any criticism, now looked at her with an expression I had never seen before. "Maya," he said quietly, his voice carrying the authority that had made him successful in courtrooms for 30 years. "You tried to destroy your sister's marriage with lies. You manipulated our entire family. You turned our love and concern for both of you into weapons against Sophia." The disappointment in his voice was more devastating than anger could have been, and I saw Maya flinch as if she had been physically struck. But Maya's response revealed the depth of her delusion about her own actions and motivations. Instead of accepting responsibility or expressing genuine remorse, she turned toward me with an expression of hurt indignation that suggested she genuinely believed she was the victim in this situation. "How could you do this to me?" she demanded, her voice rising to a pitch that carried clearly across the silent ballroom. "How could you humiliate me like this in front of everyone? I'm your sister." The audacity of her question, the complete lack of self-awareness it revealed, seemed to break whatever remaining sympathy anyone in the room might have felt for her. Our cousin Rebecca, who had been documenting everything on her phone, actually laughed out loud at Maya's attempt to position herself as the wronged party. Maya, you just tried to destroy Sophia's wedding with fabricated affair allegations, Rebecca said incredulously. You planned this for months. You manipulated all of us. And now you're upset because she defended herself? Maya's face crumpled, but whether from genuine remorse or frustration that her plan had backfired so spectacularly was impossible to determine. She looked around the room desperately, searching for someone who might offer her support or understanding, but found only faces reflecting varying degrees of shock, disappointment, and anger. Even our mother, who had always been Maya's fiercest defender and who had consistently made excuses for her manipulative behavior over the years, was staring at her eldest daughter with an expression of dawning recognition. All those times, our mother whispered, more to herself than to anyone else, all those times you came to me with concerns about Sophia, warnings about her friends, doubts about her decisions. Were you manipulating me then too? The question seemed to open a floodgate of memory, and I could see our mother mentally reviewing years of interactions with Maya, suddenly seeing patterns of manipulation that had been invisible when she believed Maya's actions were motivated by sisterly love. The photographer, who had been capturing the entire scene with the kind of professional instinct that keeps working even during crisis situations, was now documenting what would undoubtedly become the most memorable wedding reception in anyone's recent memory. But instead of the joyful celebration photos we had planned, he was recording the complete destruction of Maya's carefully constructed public persona, and the exposure of manipulative behaviors that had been hidden beneath the surface of our family dynamics for years. Maya seemed to realize that her situation was hopeless, that no amount of explanation or emotional manipulation would allow her to recover from what had just been revealed. She made one final desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative, turning to Daniel with tears streaming down her face and her hands clasped in a gesture of supplication. "Daniel, please," she begged. "I was only trying to protect you. I love Sophia too much to watch her hurt you. Everything I did was because I care about both of you." But Daniel's response eliminated any possibility that Maya might salvage something from the wreckage of her plan. "Maya," he said quietly, his voice carrying a finality that silenced the room. "You didn't try to protect me. You tried to destroy the woman I love using fabricated evidence and calculated lies. You spent months manipulating my family and friends, planting seeds of doubt about Sophia's character. You researched psychological techniques for maximizing the impact of public humiliation. Nothing about your actions was motivated by love or protection." The truth of Daniel's words seemed to strip away Maya's last vestiges of self-deception, and for a moment I saw something approaching genuine recognition of what she had done cross her face. But instead of leading to apology or accountability, this recognition seemed to fuel her anger. "Fine," she said, her voice suddenly sharp and clear, no longer shaking with tears or desperation. "You want the truth? The truth is that I'm tired of watching perfect little Sophia get everything handed to her, while I have to work for every scrap of attention or recognition." This admission, delivered with such bitter honesty, revealed more about Maya's true motivations than any of her journal entries had. It wasn't about protecting Daniel, or preserving family integrity, or any of the noble motivations she had claimed. It was about her inability to tolerate my happiness, her need to be the center of attention, her resentment that I had found love and stability that didn't require her approval or participation. "I've spent my entire life watching everyone fawn over Sophia," Maya continued, her voice growing stronger and more venomous with each word. "Sweet Sophia, perfect Sophia, Sophia who never puts a foot wrong. Well, congratulations, little sister. You got your fairy tale wedding and your perfect husband. I hope you're happy." The sarcasm in her final words was unmistakable, and it confirmed what everyone in the room had already understood. Maya's actions had never been about love or protection, but about jealousy and a desperate need to tear down what she couldn't control. The silence that followed Maya's confession was different from the shocked quiet that had greeted her initial accusations. This was the silence of people processing a fundamental shift in their understanding of someone they thought they knew, the quiet that comes when illusions are shattered and uncomfortable truths are finally acknowledged. Maya had spent years cultivating an image of herself as the caring older sister, the responsible family member, the person who could be counted on to put family loyalty above personal comfort. In the space of 15 minutes, that entire carefully constructed persona had been completely destroyed. Maya seemed to realize that she had said too much, revealed too much of her true feelings, and her face showed a kind of panic as she understood that there was no path back from this moment. She had burned bridges she couldn't rebuild, revealed truths she couldn't unsay, destroyed relationships she couldn't repair. The Maya who walked into this reception as the beloved older sister would not be the same person who left, and everyone in the room understood that our family dynamics had been permanently altered by what had just been exposed. Maya's final admission of jealousy and resentment hung in the air like smoke from a burned bridge, and the silence that followed felt charged with the electricity of fundamental change. She stood in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by the wreckage of her carefully constructed reputation, and I could see the exact moment when she realized that her confession had eliminated any possibility of recovery or redemption. The mask she had worn for so many years had not just slipped, it had been completely torn away, revealing the bitter, envious person she had always been beneath the surface. The first person to break the silence was Daniel's sister Emma, who had flown in from Denver specifically for our wedding and who had barely known Maya before this moment. "I think you should leave," she said simply, her voice carrying the kind of moral authority that comes from witnessing something so fundamentally wrong that action becomes necessary. "You don't belong at their celebration anymore. You've done enough damage." Emma's words seemed to catalyze something in the room, and I watched as other guests began to nod in agreement, their expressions shifting from shock to a kind of protective anger on our behalf. These were people who had invested time, money, and emotional energy in celebrating Daniel's and my happiness, and Maya's attempted sabotage felt like a personal attack on their generosity and love. They had dressed up, traveled from distant cities, cleared their schedules, and opened their hearts to share in our joy, only to discover that someone they trusted had been planning to weaponize their presence for maximum psychological damage. Maya looked around the room desperately, searching for anyone who might offer her support or understanding, but found only faces reflecting disappointment, anger, and something approaching contempt. Even the hotel staff, who had been moving discreetly through the ballroom during the confrontation, now stood frozen in place, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but uncertain about how to proceed. The photographer continued documenting everything, his camera capturing not just Maya's humiliation, but also the collective reaction of a room full of people realizing they had been unwitting participants in an elaborate manipulation. Our cousin David, who had always been particularly close to Maya, and who had defended her behavior countless times over the years, now looked at her with an expression of profound betrayal. "Maya, I brought my kids to this wedding," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "My 8-year-old daughter looked up to you. She thought you were the coolest person in our family. What am I supposed to tell her about what just happened here?" The mention of children seemed to penetrate Maya's self-absorption in a way that adult disappointment had not, and for a moment I saw something that might have been genuine shame cross her face. But even this recognition was quickly overshadowed by defensive anger, as she struggled to maintain some shred of justification for her actions. "I never meant for any of this to happen," she said, though her words rang hollow against the weight of evidence showing months of careful planning and deliberate manipulation. My mother, who had been sitting in stunned silence since Maya's confession, finally found her voice. "Maya, pack your things and leave the hotel tonight," she said quietly, her words carrying the finality of a judge pronouncing a sentence. "Don't come to the house. Don't call. Don't contact any of us until you've figured out how to take responsibility for what you've done." The authority in my mother's voice was absolute, and I realized that Maya had finally pushed beyond the boundaries of even unconditional parental love. But Maya's response revealed that she still didn't truly understand the magnitude of what she had done, or the permanent nature of the damage she had caused. "You're all overreacting," she said, her voice taking on the petulant tone of someone who believed she was being unfairly persecuted. "It was just a wedding. There will be other parties, other celebrations. You're acting like I committed some kind of crime." The casual dismissal of our wedding as just a wedding, the complete lack of understanding about the significance of what she had attempted to destroy, seemed to ignite something in Daniel that I had never seen before. He stepped forward, his usually calm demeanor replaced by controlled fury as he addressed Maya directly. Just a wedding, he repeated, his voice quiet but carrying clearly across the silent room. You spent months planning to destroy the most important day of our lives. You fabricated evidence of an affair, you manipulated our families and friends, you tried to end our marriage before it even began. And you think this is about overreaction? Daniel's words seemed to crystallize something for many of the guests, helping them understand that what they had witnessed wasn't just family drama or sibling rivalry, but something much more serious and calculated. Maya had committed what amounted to a sophisticated form of psychological warfare, using intimate knowledge of our relationships and vulnerabilities to inflict maximum damage at our most vulnerable moment. The hotel manager appeared at my elbow, having been summoned by the increasingly uncomfortable staff members who were uncertain about how to handle the situation. Mrs. Martinez, he said quietly, using my married name for the first time, would you like us to escort your sister from the premises? We have security available if needed. The offer was made diplomatically, but the implication was clear. Maya's behavior had crossed the line from personal drama into potential criminal territory. Before I could respond, Maya herself made the decision for us. Fine, she said, her voice brittle with false bravado. I don't want to be here anyway. You can all enjoy your perfect little celebration without me. She began walking toward the exit, her movements sharp and angry, but she paused at the edge of the ballroom and turned back to deliver one final barb. You think you've won something here, Sophia? She said, her voice carrying across the room with venomous clarity. But mark my words, this marriage won't last. Daniel will figure out who you really are eventually, and when he does, don't come crying to me for support. The threat was delivered with such naked malice that several guests actually gasped audibly, and I saw my father half rise from his chair as if to physically intervene. But Maya's parting shot, intended to wound me one final time, actually had the opposite effect. Instead of planting seeds of doubt or insecurity, her words revealed the depth of her delusion and the completeness of her inability to accept responsibility for her actions. Even in defeat, even after being exposed so thoroughly and publicly, she was still trying to manipulate and hurt me, still convinced that she was somehow the victim in this situation. As Maya disappeared through the ballroom doors, her emerald dress a flash of color against the hotel's neutral decor, the silence in the room gradually gave way to a buzz of conversation as guests began processing what they had witnessed. The photographer approached me tentatively, clearly uncertain about whether to continue documenting the reception or pack up his equipment and leave. The DJ stood frozen at his station, unsure whether to resume the celebration or wait for further instructions. It was Daniel who took charge of the situation, his natural leadership qualities emerging, as he addressed our guests with remarkable composure given what had just transpired. I want to thank all of you for being here tonight, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the ballroom without need for amplification. I know this wasn't what any of us expected, but I hope you understand that Maya's actions don't reflect on Sophia or on our families. She made choices that revealed her true character, and while that's painful for all of us, it doesn't change the fact that we're here to celebrate love and commitment. The response from our guests was immediate and supportive. Applause began slowly, with just a few people clapping, but it quickly spread throughout the room as people expressed their solidarity with us and their rejection of Maya's attempted sabotage. The sound was cathartic, washing away some of the tension and negativity that had filled the space just moments before. But even as the celebration began to resume, even as the DJ starts playing music again, and the hotel staff began serving the delayed dinner courses, I could see that something fundamental had changed in the room. The innocence and simple joy of our wedding celebration had been altered by what we had experienced together. Maya's actions had forced everyone present to confront uncomfortable truths about manipulation, family loyalty, and the lengths to which some people will go to destroy what they cannot control. The conversations that resumed around the dinner tables were different now, tinged with a new understanding of the complexity of human relationships and the reality that even family members can harbor destructive intentions. Children asked their parents quiet questions about what had happened, and I watched adults struggle to explain betrayal and jealousy in terms that young minds could understand without becoming cynical about love and trust. The weeks following our wedding reception felt like living in the aftermath of an earthquake, where the initial shock had passed but the aftershocks continued to reshape the landscape of our family relationships in ways both expected and surprising. Maya had vanished completely after her dramatic exit from the Grand Meridian Hotel, leaving behind only a forwarding address with the post office and a brief, coldly worded text to our mother stating that she was taking time to reassess her priorities and relationships. The silence from Maya was both a relief and a source of ongoing tension, because while her absence meant we could begin healing from the immediate trauma of her attempted sabotage, it also meant that crucial conversations about accountability and consequences remained unresolved. Our family members found themselves in the uncomfortable position of having to make decisions about how to move forward without Maya's participation, and the discussions that followed revealed deep fractures in how we had all enabled her manipulative behavior over the years. Our mother, Margaret, seemed to age 10 years in the days immediately following the wedding. She spent hours going through old photo albums and family videos, as if trying to identify the moment when Maya's protective sister persona had transformed into something calculated and destructive. "I keep thinking about all the times she came to me with concerns about you," she told me during a tearful conversation in her kitchen, surrounded by the detritus of a lifetime of family celebrations. "How many of those were real, and how many were just opportunities to manipulate my feelings?" The question haunted all of us because it forced us to reconsider years of family dynamics through a new lens of understanding. Maya's pattern of creating problems and then positioning herself as the caring family member who was reluctantly bringing them to light suddenly became visible in dozens of past incidents that we had previously interpreted as evidence of her love and concern. Birthday parties where she had expressed worry about my social development, holiday gatherings where she had shared concerns about my academic choices, family vacations where she had questioned whether I was making friends easily enough. Our father's response was characteristically methodical and legal in its approach. He spent several days researching the potential criminal implications of Maya's actions, consulting with colleagues who specialized in harassment and defamation law. "What she did goes beyond family drama," he explained to Daniel and me during a meeting in his home office, surrounded by law books and case studies. "She fabricated evidence with the intent to cause psychological and emotional harm. She manipulated multiple people through deception. In some jurisdictions, this could constitute criminal harassment or conspiracy to commit defamation." The possibility of legal action against Maya created another layer of complexity in our family's healing process. While part of me was gratified to have my father's professional validation that Maya's behavior had crossed the line from personal conflict into potentially criminal territory, another part of me was exhausted by the prospect of extending this conflict through the court system. Daniel and I ultimately decided against pursuing criminal charges, but we did consult with a family law attorney about obtaining a restraining order that would legally prohibit Maya from contacting us or interfering in our lives. The social media aftermath of our wedding reception proved to be both a blessing and a curse. Several guests had recorded portions of Maya's dramatic announcement and my subsequent revelation of her journal entries, and within days, clips of the confrontation were circulating on various platforms with captions like, "Sister tries to destroy wedding with fake affair claims," and "Bride exposes sister's elaborate sabotage plan." The viral nature of the videos meant that Maya's attempted manipulation was being viewed and discussed by thousands of strangers, but it also meant that our most painful family moment had become public entertainment. The comments on these social media posts revealed fascinating insights into how people interpreted what they had witnessed. Many viewers expressed admiration for how I had handled Maya's attack, praising my preparation and strategic thinking. Others criticized me for humiliating Maya so publicly, arguing that family conflicts should be resolved privately regardless of the circumstances. A significant number of people shared their own stories of dealing with manipulative family members, creating an unexpected community of support and understanding around our experience. But perhaps the most valuable outcome of the social media attention was the messages I received from women who recognized patterns from their own lives in Maya's behavior. "Your sister's journal could have been written by my mother," one woman wrote. "The detailed planning, the psychological manipulation, the way she positioned herself as the caring family member while actually destroying relationships. Thank you for showing that it's possible to stand up to this kind of abuse without becoming the villain. These messages helped me understand that Maya's behavior wasn't unique or unprecedented, but rather part of a broader pattern of psychological manipulation that many people experience within their own families. The realization that I wasn't alone in dealing with someone who used love and concern as weapons for control was both comforting and disturbing, suggesting that Maya's capacity for calculated cruelty was more common than I had ever imagined. The impact on our extended family relationships proved to be the most complex and long-lasting consequence of Maya's actions. Our cousins, aunts, uncles, and family friends found themselves having to choose sides in a conflict they had never asked to be part of, and their responses revealed surprising truths about family loyalty, moral boundaries, and the willingness to excuse destructive behavior in the name of keeping the peace. Our cousin Rebecca, who had been documenting Maya's manipulative text messages for months, became an unexpected ally and advocate in our family's healing process. She organized several family meetings where relatives could process what had happened and discuss how to prevent similar situations in the future. These conversations were often difficult and emotional, forcing family members to confront their own roles in enabling Maya's behavior and to commit to healthier patterns of communication and accountability. However, not all family members were supportive of our decision to expose Maya's plans so publicly. Our great-aunt Helen, who had always favored Maya, and who had invested significant emotional energy in their relationship, accused me of orchestrating a cruel revenge plot that was worse than anything Maya had attempted. Family should protect family, she argued during one particularly heated phone conversation, and what you did to Maya was unforgivable. You destroyed her reputation and her relationships for everyone to see. These accusations stung because they touched on my own lingering doubts about whether I had handled the situation correctly. Had there been a way to stop Maya's sabotage without exposing her so completely and publicly? Could I have found a path that protected my marriage, while also preserving Maya's dignity and our family relationships? The questions haunted me during sleepless nights when I replayed the wedding reception confrontation, and wondered if I had chosen justice over mercy in a way that made me as manipulative as Maya herself. Daniel proved to be an invaluable source of perspective and support during these dark moments of self-doubt. Maya made the choice to attack our marriage publicly, he reminded me, whenever I began questioning our response strategy. She researched psychological techniques for maximizing humiliation. She recruited unwitting accomplices from our families and friends. She planned for months to destroy the most important day of our lives. You didn't create that situation, Sophia. You just refused to be a victim of it. The legal consultation about the restraining order revealed additional disturbing information about Maya's activities in the weeks leading up to our wedding. Our attorney's investigation uncovered evidence that Maya had been much more active in her sabotage campaign than even her journal had revealed. She had created fake social media accounts to research Daniel's ex-girlfriends, had attempted to contact my former coworkers to gather negative information about my professional reputation, and had even driven by our apartment multiple times to document our daily routines and visitors. This additional evidence of stalking and surveillance behavior pushed our decision about legal action from uncertain to necessary. We filed for a comprehensive restraining order that would prohibit Maya from contacting us directly or indirectly, from coming within 500 feet of our home or workplaces, and from using social media or other platforms to harass or defame us. The legal process was emotionally draining but also validating, as it provided official recognition that Maya's behavior had crossed the line from family conflict into criminal harassment. The restraining order hearing took place 6 weeks after our wedding, in a sterile courtroom that felt surreal compared to the elegant ballroom where Maya's plan had been exposed. Maya appeared with a court-appointed attorney, looking smaller and more fragile than I had ever seen her, but her testimony revealed that she still viewed herself as the victim in our conflict. She claimed that my public exposure of her journal was revenge for her legitimate concerns about my relationship, and she maintained that her actions had been motivated by love rather than malice. The judge's response was swift and decisive. After reviewing the evidence of Maya's elaborate planning, her manipulation of family members, and her ongoing harassment behaviors, he granted our request for a 3-year restraining order with the possibility of extension. The court finds clear evidence of a pattern of harassment, manipulation, and attempted psychological abuse, he stated formally. The defendant's actions demonstrate a calculated effort to cause emotional and psychological harm, and her continued refusal to accept responsibility for these actions indicates that legal intervention is necessary to protect the plaintiffs. As we left the courthouse that day, I felt a complex mixture of relief, sadness, and something approaching closure. The legal system had validated our experience and provided protection against further harassment, but it had also formalized the complete breakdown of my relationship with the sister who had once been my closest family member. The little girl who had shared my bedroom and played dress-up with me was gone, replaced by someone I no longer recognized or trusted, and that loss felt like a death that couldn't be properly mourned. The months that followed the restraining order hearing became a period of unexpected personal growth and family reconstruction that I hadn't anticipated when we first decided to pursue legal protection from Maya's harassment. The absence of her constant manipulation and psychological pressure created space for me to discover aspects of my personality and capabilities that had been suppressed by years of walking on eggshells around her volatile emotions and calculated attacks on my confidence. Daniel and I began attending couples counseling, not because our marriage was in crisis, but because we wanted to process the trauma of Maya's attempted sabotage and build stronger communication skills for navigating future challenges together. Our therapist, Dr. Patricia Williams, helped us understand that what we had experienced wasn't just family drama or sibling rivalry, but a form of psychological abuse that had affected both of us in ways we were only beginning to recognize. Sophia, you've spent most of your adult life managing Maya's emotions and reactions, Dr. Williams observed during one of our early sessions. You've developed hypervigilance around conflict and an automatic response to minimize your own needs and achievements to avoid triggering her jealousy. That's not healthy relationship behavior. That's survival behavior developed in response to ongoing emotional threat. Her words helped me understand why I had felt so exhausted for so many years, constantly monitoring my own happiness and success to ensure they didn't provoke Maya's destructive responses. The therapy sessions also revealed how Maya's manipulations had affected Daniel's relationship with my family and his confidence in our marriage. I spent months questioning whether Sophia's family dysfunction would eventually destroy our relationship, he admitted during one particularly emotional session. Maya's constant undermining made me doubt whether I really knew Sophia, whether our foundation was as solid as I believed. I was walking around waiting for the other shoe to drop, expecting some revelation that would prove Maya's concerns were justified. Understanding the full scope of Maya's psychological impact on both of us actually strengthened our marriage rather than weakening it. We developed new strategies for communication that didn't involve the defensive patterns I had learned from years of dealing with Maya's manipulations. Daniel learned to recognize when I was minimizing my own needs or achievements out of habit, and I learned to trust his support without constantly testing whether he would abandon me when conflicts arose. The healing process wasn't linear or simple. There were days when I missed the Maya I thought I had known, the sister who had existed in my childhood memories before I understood the calculated nature of her seeming care and protection. I found myself grieving not just the loss of our relationship but the realization that many of my happiest family memories had been tainted by manipulations I hadn't recognized at the time. My relationship with our parents evolved significantly during this period as they grappled with their own guilt and confusion about Maya's behavior. My mother began individual therapy to process her role in enabling Maya's manipulative patterns, and she made conscious efforts to change communication dynamics that had previously given Maya disproportionate power in our family system. I always thought I was being fair by listening to Maya's concerns about you, my mother explained during one of our weekly coffee meetings, which had become a new tradition since the wedding. But I realize now that I was actually participating in her campaigns to undermine your confidence in relationships. She trained me to see her criticism of you as evidence of how much she cared, when really it was evidence of how much she needed to control you. My father's response was more analytical but equally profound. He began researching family systems theory and psychological manipulation, approaching Maya's behavior like a legal case he needed to understand thoroughly. Maya developed sophisticated techniques for emotional manipulation that would be impressive if they weren't so destructive, he told me during one of our conversations in his study. She understood how to use family loyalty and concern as weapons, how to position herself as the victim while actually being the aggressor. It's textbook psychological warfare, disguised as love. The extended family's adjustment to Maya's absence created ripple effects that continued for months after the restraining order was finalized. Family gatherings had to be completely restructured to accommodate the reality that Maya could no longer be included in group events, and relatives had to choose between maintaining relationships with her or participating in family celebrations that included Daniel and me. Our cousin Rebecca took on an unexpected leadership role in helping family members navigate these difficult choices. She organized several family meetings where people could discuss their feelings about the situation and establish new boundaries and communication patterns that would prevent similar manipulations in the future. These conversations were often difficult and emotional, but they ultimately strengthened relationships among family members who had previously been unwittingly pitted against each other by Maya's divide-and-conquer strategies. We all enabled Maya's behavior by treating her manipulation as normal family dynamics, Rebecca observed during one of these meetings. We accepted her version of events, made excuses for her actions, and dismissed the people she targeted as being too sensitive or dramatic. We have to acknowledge our role in allowing this pattern to continue for so many years. The most surprising development during this healing period was the emergence of my own voice and confidence in ways that had been impossible while Maya's psychological pressure was constant. Without the need to constantly manage her emotions or deflect her attacks, I began pursuing interests and goals that I had previously minimized or abandoned to avoid triggering her jealousy. I started writing again, something I had loved in college but had gradually stopped doing after Maya's repeated criticisms of my creative work. I joined a local writers' group and began working on a memoir about family manipulation and psychological abuse, finding that the process of documenting my experiences helped other people recognize similar patterns in their own relationships. The writing project connected me with a community of people who had survived various forms of family abuse and manipulation, and their stories helped me understand that Maya's behavior wasn't unique or unprecedented. Many of the techniques she had used, creating false concerns, positioning herself as a protective family member while actually being destructive, using family loyalty as a weapon, were common strategies employed by manipulative family members across different cultures and backgrounds. I also began speaking at support groups and workshops about recognizing and responding to family manipulation, sharing our story as an example of how it's possible to set boundaries and protect yourself without becoming abusive in return. These speaking engagements were initially terrifying for me, since Maya had spent years convincing me that my perspectives and experiences weren't worth sharing, but they became an important part of my healing process. The response from audiences was overwhelmingly positive and validating. After one presentation about psychological manipulation in families, a woman approached me with tears in her eyes and said, "You just described my entire relationship with my brother. I thought I was crazy for feeling like his quote, concern for me was actually attacks on my confidence and relationships. Thank you for showing me that I'm not alone and that it's possible to protect myself." Daniel's support during this period of personal growth and public speaking was unwavering and crucial to my continued healing. He encouraged my writing, attended my speaking engagements when possible, and helped me process the complex emotions that arose from sharing our story publicly. He also dealt gracefully with the occasional negative responses from people who believed family conflicts should remain private regardless of the circumstances. "Some people will always believe that family loyalty means accepting abuse," he observed after one particularly challenging question-and-answer session where someone had criticized me for destroying Maya's reputation. "But those people haven't lived with the kind of systematic manipulation you experienced. They don't understand that sometimes protecting yourself requires exposing the truth, even when that truth is uncomfortable for other people." The first anniversary of our wedding arrived with a mixture of celebration and reflection that felt appropriate for how much our lives had changed in that single year. We decided to mark the occasion with a small dinner party for the family members and friends who had supported us through the crisis, people who had chosen truth and accountability over comfortable denial and family mythology. As I looked around our dining room table that evening, filled with people who had witnessed Maya's attempted sabotage and had chosen to support our healing rather than enable her continued manipulation, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the clarity and authenticity that had emerged from such a painful experience. We had lost Maya, but we had gained something perhaps more valuable: the knowledge that our relationships were based on genuine love and respect rather than obligation, fear, or manipulation. The evening was filled with laughter, honest conversation, and the kind of deep connection that becomes possible when people have weathered crisis together and emerged stronger. Our cousin Rebecca raised a toast that captured the significance of what we had all experienced. To Sophia and Daniel, who showed us that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's destructive behavior, even when that someone is family. 2 years after our wedding, the impact of our story began extending far beyond our immediate family and social circle in ways I never could have anticipated. The video clips from our reception had evolved from viral entertainment into case studies used by therapists, family counselors, and domestic violence advocates to illustrate sophisticated forms of psychological manipulation within families. I started receiving messages from professionals who wanted to use our experience as an educational tool for training other counselors and social workers. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a prominent family therapist from Chicago, reached out to request permission to include portions of our story in a research paper she was writing about covert narcissistic abuse within sibling relationships. Your sister's behavior demonstrates textbook examples of several manipulation techniques that are often difficult for victims to recognize because they're disguised as care and concern, she explained during our phone conversation. The documentation you preserved provides unprecedented insight into the planning and execution of this type of psychological warfare. The academic interest in our story led to invitations to speak at professional conferences and workshops, opportunities that initially intimidated me but ultimately became powerful platforms for education and advocacy. My first presentation was at a regional conference for family therapists, where I shared the stage with Dr. Mitchell to discuss the importance of believing clients who report subtle forms of family manipulation. One of the most damaging aspects of covert psychological abuse is how it makes victims doubt their own perceptions and experiences, I explained to the audience of mental health professionals. For years, I questioned whether Maya's behavior was really as manipulative as it felt, because she was so skilled at making her attacks look like expressions of love and concern. Having concrete evidence of her planning validated my reality in ways that were crucial to my healing. The response from the therapeutic community was overwhelming and deeply validating. Many therapists shared their own struggles with helping clients who reported family manipulation that was difficult to prove or document. They expressed gratitude for having a clear example of how sophisticated these manipulation campaigns could be, and how important it was to trust clients' reports of emotional abuse, even when the evidence wasn't immediately visible. But perhaps the most meaningful outcome of sharing our story publicly was the connection it created with other survivors of family manipulation and abuse. I began receiving dozens of emails each week from people who recognized patterns from their own lives in Maya's behavior, and many of these correspondences developed into ongoing support relationships that enriched my understanding of how common these experiences actually were. One particularly impactful message came from a woman named Jennifer in Oregon, who wrote, "I've been in therapy for 3 years trying to understand why my relationship with my mother feels so toxic and damaging, but she's never physically abused me and everyone thinks she's wonderful. Reading about your sister's journal and her systematic planning helped me realize that my mother has been using similar techniques for decades. She creates problems, then positions herself as the caring parent who's trying to help me solve them. She plants seeds of doubt about my relationships and decisions, then offers herself as my primary source of support and guidance." Jennifer's message led to a series of conversations that helped both of us understand the common patterns in our experiences. Her mother, like Maya, had developed sophisticated techniques for maintaining control through manufactured crises and false concern. She had isolated Jennifer from friends and romantic partners by expressing subtle doubts about their motivations and character, then positioned herself as the only person who truly understood and supported Jennifer's well-being. These conversations with other survivors helped me develop a clearer understanding of the psychological dynamics that had shaped my relationship with Maya from childhood. I began to see how Maya's need for control and attention had manifested in increasingly sophisticated manipulation techniques as we grew older, and how my natural empathy and desire for family harmony had made me an ideal target for her emotional manipulation. The insights I gained from connecting with other survivors also enhanced my public speaking and writing, allowing me to address the broader patterns of family manipulation rather than focusing solely on our specific experience. I developed presentations about recognizing red flags in family relationships, setting boundaries with manipulative relatives, and protecting children from psychological abuse disguised as care and concern. One of my most requested presentations became The Myth of Family Loyalty, When Love Becomes a Weapon, which explored how manipulative family members use concepts of loyalty, love, and protection to justify and disguise their abusive behavior. I would explain how Maya had positioned her destructive actions as evidence of her love for me and her concern for Daniel's well-being, making it difficult for family members to recognize the manipulation without appearing to reject family values. True family loyalty isn't about enabling destructive behavior or accepting abuse in silence, I would tell audiences. Real love doesn't require you to sacrifice your well-being, your relationships, or your reality to make someone else comfortable. When family members use love and loyalty as justifications for harmful actions, they're weaponizing these concepts rather than expressing them authentically. The speaking engagements also connected me with legal professionals who were interested in the intersection between psychological abuse and criminal law. Maya's case had highlighted gaps in legal protection for victims of sophisticated emotional manipulation, particularly when the abuse occurred within family relationships where some level of conflict was considered normal. Attorney Michael Rodriguez, who specialized in domestic violence law, invited me to participate in a panel discussion about expanding legal definitions of harassment and abuse to include covert psychological manipulation. Your sister's behavior clearly caused significant emotional and psychological harm, he explained, but prosecuting cases like this is challenging because the legal system is better equipped to address overt threats and physical violence than sophisticated emotional manipulation. Our panel discussion led to ongoing conversations about how the legal system might better protect victims of psychological abuse, particularly in cases where the manipulation was well documented but didn't fit traditional definitions of harassment or stalking. Several jurisdictions began considering legislation that would expand protective order eligibility to include victims of systematic emotional manipulation, using cases like ours as examples of why broader legal protections were necessary. The professional recognition of our story's educational value was gratifying, but the personal connections with other survivors remained the most meaningful aspect of sharing our experience publicly. I established an online support group for people dealing with manipulative family members, which grew to include hundreds of participants from around the world who found solidarity and validation in sharing their experiences. The support group became a safe space for people to discuss family manipulation without fear of being told they were overreacting or being too sensitive. Members shared strategies for protecting themselves, resources for healing from psychological abuse, and encouragement for those who were struggling to set boundaries with manipulative relatives. One member, David from Australia, shared how his brother had used similar tactics to Maya's, creating false emergencies and crises that required David's immediate attention and support, then positioning himself as the victim when David began setting boundaries. "I thought I was going crazy," David wrote in the group. "My brother would manufacture situations that made me look selfish or uncaring if I didn't drop everything to help him, but the help he needed was always related to problems he had created himself. Reading everyone's stories here helped me understand that this was manipulation, not bad luck or legitimate need." The support group also became a resource for family members and friends of manipulation victims, helping them understand how to provide support without inadvertently enabling the manipulative behavior. Many group members shared frustration about well-meaning relatives who encouraged them to work things out with their abusers, or who couldn't understand why family conflicts couldn't be resolved through communication and compromise. As the third anniversary of our wedding approached, Daniel and I reflected on how profoundly our lives had been shaped by Maya's attempted sabotage and our decision to expose her manipulation publicly. What had begun as a defensive response to a personal attack had evolved into a platform for education, advocacy, and support that was helping people around the world recognize and respond to similar forms of abuse. Sometimes I wonder what our lives would have looked like if Maya had succeeded, Daniel mused during one of our evening walks through our neighborhood. If her plan had worked, if she had managed to destroy our marriage, would we ever have understood the depth of her manipulation? Would other people still be trapped in relationships with her, not understanding why they felt so exhausted and confused all the time? His question highlighted one of the most significant outcomes of our experience, the ripple effect of truth-telling and boundary setting that extended far beyond our immediate situation. By refusing to accept Maya's manipulation, and by documenting the evidence of her calculated cruelty, we had created a roadmap that other people could follow to protect themselves from similar abuse. The transformation in our own family relationships had been equally profound and positive. Without Maya's constant stirring of conflict and competition, our relatives had developed deeper, more authentic connections with each other. Family gatherings were now characterized by genuine warmth and support, rather than the underlying tension that had always accompanied Maya's presence. My relationship with my parents had evolved into something more mature and balanced, based on mutual respect rather than the protective instincts that Maya had continuously triggered through her manufactured crises and concerns. My mother, in particular, had flourished in therapy and had developed much stronger boundaries around accepting other people's versions of events without verification. I spent so many years being Maya's unwitting accomplice, she had reflected during one of our recent conversations. I let her train me to see her criticism of you as evidence of how much she cared, and I participated in undermining your confidence and relationships without even realizing what I was doing. Learning to recognize those patterns has helped me become a better mother to you, and a more supportive person in general. 5 years have passed since that September evening, when Maya stood in our wedding ballroom and attempted to destroy the most important day of our lives, and the woman I have become would be barely recognizable to the person who once spent sleepless nights worrying about managing Maya's emotions and reactions. The transformation has been gradual but profound, like watching a garden bloom after removing the weeds that had been choking out every healthy plant for decades. My book Behind the Mask, Recognizing and Surviving Family Manipulation, was published 18 months ago and has become what my editor calls an unexpected phenomenon in the psychology and self-help communities. The memoir combines our personal story with research about family manipulation tactics and practical strategies for protecting oneself from psychological abuse disguised as love and concern. What began as a therapeutic writing exercise has evolved into a resource that libraries, therapists, and support groups across the country use to help people identify and escape similar situations. The book tour was initially terrifying for me, since public speaking had always triggered the anxiety responses I had developed from years of walking on eggshells around Maya's volatile reactions. But with each presentation, each interview, each conversation with readers who recognized their own experiences in our story, I felt my voice growing stronger and more confident. Daniel often accompanied me to events, providing quiet support and occasionally sharing his perspective on how Maya's manipulation had affected our relationship and his integration into our family. During a book signing in Denver, a middle-aged woman approached me with tears streaming down her face and a well-worn copy of my book clutched in her hands. "You saved my daughter's relationship with her fiancé," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "My oldest daughter has been doing to her sister exactly what Maya did to you, and we didn't recognize it until we read your story. We were about to lose our younger daughter because we kept making excuses for her sister's behavior, but your book helped us understand that we were enabling abuse, not preserving family unity." Stories like this one have become the most rewarding aspect of sharing our experience publicly. The emails, letters, and messages I receive regularly demonstrate that Maya's calculated cruelty inadvertently became the catalyst for helping thousands of people recognize and escape similar forms of psychological manipulation. Every time someone writes to tell me that our story helped them set boundaries with a toxic family member or recognize manipulation disguised as concern, I feel a profound sense of purpose and gratitude. The online support community I established has grown into a nonprofit organization called Clarity and Courage, which provides resources, education, and support for people dealing with family manipulation and psychological abuse. We now have trained facilitators running support groups in 12 cities, a 24-hour crisis helpline staffed by licensed counselors, and educational workshops that we present to mental health professionals, social workers, and family court personnel. The organization's most innovative program is our Evidence Documentation Workshop, which teaches people how to recognize and document psychological manipulation in ways that can be useful for legal proceedings, therapy, or simply for validating their own experiences. We developed this program after receiving dozens of requests from people who suspected they were being manipulated, but lacked the concrete evidence that had been so crucial to our own case. One of the most insidious aspects of covert psychological abuse is how it makes victims doubt their own perceptions and memories, explains Dr. Sophia Chen, the clinical psychologist who serves as our organization's Director of Educational Programs. When someone has been systematically manipulated for years, they often struggle to distinguish between legitimate concerns and manufactured crises. Teaching people to document patterns and behaviors helps them reclaim their reality and build confidence in their own judgment. The workshop curriculum includes techniques for safely documenting manipulative behaviors, understanding legal definitions of harassment and abuse, and building support networks that can provide objective perspectives on relationship dynamics. We also teach participants how to recognize when they might be unconsciously enabling manipulative behavior in others, since many people who have been victims of manipulation develop hypervigilant responses that can sometimes manifest as controlling behaviors in their other relationships. My relationship with Daniel has deepened and strengthened in ways I never could have imagined during those early years when Maya's psychological pressure was a constant presence in our lives. The couples therapy we began after our wedding helped us develop communication patterns that weren't shaped by the defensive strategies I had learned from dealing with Maya's manipulations. And we've continued working with Dr. Williams periodically to ensure our relationship remains healthy and authentic. We recently celebrated the birth of our daughter Emma Grace, whose arrival has brought unexpected healing and joy to our family while also highlighting how different our parenting approach will be from the dynamics that allowed Maya's manipulative behavior to flourish unchecked. Daniel and I have spent considerable time discussing how to raise Emma with strong boundaries, critical thinking skills, and the confidence to trust her own perceptions, even when other people try to convince her otherwise. I want Emma to grow up knowing that love doesn't require self-sacrifice or acceptance of harmful behavior, I told Daniel during one of our late-night conversations while feeding our newborn daughter. I want her to understand that healthy relationships are characterized by mutual respect and support, not by one person constantly managing another person's emotions or accepting responsibility for their actions. The experience of becoming a mother has also given me a new perspective on my own parents' role in enabling Maya's manipulation over the years. I can now understand how their love for both of us, combined with their desire to maintain family harmony, made them vulnerable to Maya's sophisticated manipulation tactics. However, understanding their motivations doesn't excuse the damage that was done, and I've been clear with them about the boundaries that will be necessary to protect Emma from similar dynamics. My parents have embraced their grandparent role with enthusiasm and have worked hard to maintain the healthier communication patterns they developed through therapy after Maya's exile from our family. My mother, in particular, has become a strong advocate for our organization's work and frequently shares our resources with other parents who express concerns about family manipulation or psychological abuse. I wish I had understood these patterns when you and Maya were young, she reflected during a recent visit, watching Emma sleep peacefully in her crib. I might have been able to intervene before Maya's behavior became so entrenched and destructive, but I'm grateful that Emma will grow up in a family that understands the difference between love and manipulation, between protection and control. The question of whether Maya will ever attempt to re-establish contact with our family remains an ongoing consideration, particularly now that Emma has been born. The restraining order expired after 3 years, and while Maya hasn't attempted any direct contact, we occasionally receive reports from mutual acquaintances about her current life and activities. She apparently moved to the West Coast, changed her career from marketing to real estate, and maintains minimal contact with our extended family members. According to our cousin Rebecca, who maintains limited communication with Maya primarily to monitor any potential threats to our safety, Maya has never acknowledged responsibility for her actions or expressed genuine remorse for the damage she caused. Instead, she apparently continues to position herself as the victim of our family's overreaction to what she describes as her legitimate concerns about my relationship with Daniel. Maya still tells people that she was trying to protect you from making a mistake, Rebecca reported during our most recent conversation about Maya's current situation. She's created this narrative where she's the misunderstood sister who was punished for caring too much, and she seems to genuinely believe this version of events. It's actually quite disturbing how completely she's rewritten history to maintain her self-image as the victim. This information reinforces our decision to maintain strong boundaries and security measures, particularly now that we have Emma to protect. We've installed comprehensive home security systems, maintained careful documentation of our family's activities and communications, and have contingency plans in place should Maya ever attempt to reinsert herself into our lives. The legal protections available to us have expanded significantly since our original case, largely due to advocacy efforts by organizations like ours that have successfully lobbied for broader definitions of harassment and psychological abuse. Several states now have laws specifically addressing covert manipulation and emotional abuse within family relationships, making it easier for victims to obtain protective orders and legal remedies. As I write this final reflection on our journey from Maya's attempted sabotage to our current life of authentic relationships and purposeful work, I'm struck by how profoundly trauma can be transformed into triumph when we refuse to accept the role of victim and instead choose to become advocates for truth and healing. Maya intended to destroy my marriage and my happiness, but her calculated cruelty instead became the catalyst for discovering my own strength, voice, and purpose. Emma is stirring in her bassinet beside my desk, making the soft sounds that indicate she'll be awake and hungry soon. As I prepare to close my laptop and attend to her needs, I'm filled with gratitude for the life Daniel and I have built together, for the family and friends who supported us through our darkest moments, and for the thousands of people around the world who have found courage and clarity through our story. Maya once told me that I would never be strong enough to survive without her protection and guidance. She was wrong about that, as she was wrong about so many things. I didn't just survive her attempts to destroy my happiness. I thrived in ways that became possible only after her toxic influence was removed from my life. And every day, through our organization's work and the ongoing impact of our story, I help other people discover the same truth: that love doesn't hurt, family doesn't require self-sacrifice, and we all deserve relationships based on genuine care rather than manipulation and control. The little girl who once apologized for breaking her own music box grew up to become a woman who refuses to accept responsibility for other people's destructive choices. And Emma will grow up knowing that her voice matters, her perceptions are valid, and her well-being is never negotiable, regardless of who might try to convince her otherwise. Last month, on Emma's second birthday, something extraordinary happened that brought our story full circle in the most unexpected way. As we celebrated in our backyard with close family and friends, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The sender identified herself as Jessica, Maya's former friend, who had received those damning text messages years ago. "I wanted you to know," she wrote, "that Maya reached out to me recently asking for help to, quote, reconnect with her family. She wanted me to convince you that she's changed, that she's been in therapy, that she deserves another chance. But I remembered those texts she sent me about destroying your wedding, and I told her I couldn't help her manipulate you again. I thought you should know she's still trying to find ways back into your life." I showed the message to Daniel, and we both smiled, not with worry or fear, but with quiet confidence. The woman who once would have spent sleepless nights anxious about Maya's next move was gone. In her place stood someone who understood that true strength comes from maintaining boundaries, not from accommodating people who refuse to respect them. "Some stories don't end with reconciliation," I told Daniel as we watched Emma chase bubbles across our lawn, surrounded by people who love her unconditionally. "Sometimes they end with peace." If this story resonated with you, you're not alone. Thousands of people are discovering their own strength and setting boundaries with toxic family members every day. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to join our community of survivors who are choosing healing over enabling. Truth over toxic peace. Share your own story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to find their courage. Remember, you deserve relationships that build you up, not tear you down. Subscribe now for more stories of triumph, healing, and the power of choosing yourself. Biceps sparkles.